Welcome to The Gaze. I'm glad to be with you on a digital platform of New Europe, platform where we will show you all the significant events in different regions that at the end of the day affects the world globally, and we will speak about it with our experts for you. So I'm Ksenia Smirnova, and it's my show Talk for More Details, and today we will speak about counteroffensive and weapons supply for Ukraine. And we will talk about this with Pavel Fischer, the chairman of the Czech Senate Committee on Foreign Affairs, Defense and Security. So nice to meet you.
Ksenia, thank you for having me.
Nice to meet you, and thank you for your time. So at the beginning of our conversation, I want to add some more information for our discussion. And I would like to start with the information about the weapons makers in Poland, in Czech Republic, that are launching or expanding programs to recruit and train new workers after the Ukraine war drove a spike in demand for their productions, wrote Reuters. Central Europe's arms industry has been churning out guns, shells and other military supplies at the fastest pace since the fall of the Berlin Wall, as campaigns accelerate production to supply Ukraine and feed demands globally as countries boost defense spending. For example, ammunition and artillery shell producers STV Group agreed with the city closest to its biggest plant to build company-financed apartments for new hires, and company's chairman David Hack told Reuters. So with enough labor and materials, Czech companies could boost production by up to 20%, he estimated. The association, which represents more than 160 companies, said exports accounted for around 90% of the industry's production of weapons and military-related supplies. So my question is, can we conclude that all the disputes in the European Parliament and the European Commission and other bodies in Europe on the issues of building facilities for the production of the necessary equipment and ammunition for the defense of Europe and support of Ukraine have been completely and finally solved and are in the process?
Ksenia, your question is about all the disputes, and I cannot avoid, or we cannot avoid some other debates in the coming weeks and months. Nevertheless, there is a wake-up call in the Europe as a whole that our chain of command or supply chain, our stores or strategic storage of ammunition or weaponry or of strategic equipment for the crisis management of our countries was really underestimated if we compare it to the experience that we have with Ukraine under attack of Russia. And this is something that we have to rethink, recreate, because we have know-how, but we have not enough of capacities of raw materials or of production line and or financial assets to boost it in order to have it working 24/7.
Mm-hmm. I would like to remind the position and the words of your presidents that I found on the portal Politica, the issue Politica. So in April, there was an information in this article. Your president, Mr. Petr Pavel, who chaired NATO's military committee from 2015 to 2018, he was using his knowledge. Now he's using his knowledge of the alliance inner working and his extensive military experience, highly unusual for a European leader, to advocate for more effective support of Ukraine and a more nuanced approach to NATO defense policy. In which way? During a visit to Brussels, it was in April, Petr Pavel floated the idea of creating a new proposal for extending defense companies' production lines, possibly using a mix of national and European subsidies so that they could have extra capacity to draw upon in times of crisis. So it's about money. What's the problem now? couldn't he manage to solve this problem? Or on what countries in the European Union it depends on to solve this problem?
We have many countries which succeeded to maintain their potential of production, the know-how of arms production. Nevertheless, the market in Europe is very compartmented. So you have a very large competition, which is a good thing because you have very good results. But at the end of the day, the market is compartmented, and every single country having some know-how tries to preserve it and to maintain and develop it. Nevertheless, if you go back maybe 10 years or 15 years ago, we can revisit the creation of European Defence Agency. And this is a tool which is aimed and crafted in order to create synergies and enable European companies and European governments to cooperate very closely under the umbrella of the European Union. And we have similar agencies also under the umbrella of NATO. I think that the structures were here, the intuition was here, but such a large scale conflict that we witness today with the consumption of, unfortunately, human lives or of civilian infrastructure which is destroyed, or of weaponry and of rockets or of shells is on such a scale that we revisit today our plans, our defense planning, and we have also to revisit our industrial policies. Mm-hmm.
I would like to add some more numbers and data and facts, but you already said your position. That's why I just put a question to you. So there's some rumors that NATO countries don't want to give weapons for Ukraine as there will no weapon for self-defense. Is that true for Czech Republic too?
You know, last July, I was discussing this, so I mean July 2022, with the highest representatives of the biggest NATO countries. And I have rediscovered that the amount of assistance provided to Ukraine created loopholes in our storage, in our strategic storage. And I think that we have to be aware that by providing assistance, necessary assistance to Ukraine, we have to wake up ourselves. Ukraine, for me, is a very unique situation in which it has to defend itself. It had succeeded to convince also ourselves that we are able to stop the aggressor, and you bought us a time. And I think that in our public debates here in Czech Republic, for instance, in Prague, or in Europe, we have to be aware and reminded then that the time that Ukraine succeeded to provide us is very costly in terms of human lives, in terms of victims, in terms of costs. And that it doesn't mean that we should sleep and just take a rest. This is the time that we have to use for strategizing and for reinforcing our not only military and defense capabilities, but also our civilian capabilities. We admire, for instance, how quickly Ukraine succeeded to connect civilian sector and defense, military sector. And this is something that we have also to take as a lesson for ourselves.
I want to jump a little further because we started to talk about the NATO and the situation with the security, especially in the Western European countries. So I want to ask you, do you really see any threats from the side of Russian Federation towards your country? Because a lot of threats very loudly we can hear from propagandist channels of Russian television towards Poland and toward Baltic countries. So when you're saying about strengthening your borders, and we see that the NATO are trying to do it, especially in the western borders of European Union. So what threats from Russia you feel and you awaiting and you maybe see actually right now?
First of all, we live in an open space, open democratic space, enabling every single citizen of the Czech Republic to take part on the life, on the public decision making. And this open space and this proximity of elected bodies or of administration with the citizens is an asset. But if we speak about psychological warfare or hybrid warfare, which is undermining trust of citizens, this open space becomes an enabler or an incentive for Russia and for China also and others to intrude themselves. They do not have even the right of they do not need it to have a right of residence here. They do not pay taxes. They do not have a permit, but they intrude themselves, invite themselves to our public debate, disseminating mistrust, disseminating feeling of distrust of people towards the rule of law, towards democracy, and towards their elected governments, for instance. And this is something extremely dangerous. We see it in Czech Republic. By the way, Cambridge Analytica, the famous online tool, was used in the Czech Republic even before it was used in the UK or in the United States. And it was hired by then the candidate Miloš Zeman, who was very close to Russian money. So we have some experience. We follow the lessons learned from other democratic countries. Nevertheless, in times of war, we have to be extremely cautious. For instance, last session, we approved defense cooperation with the United States. You can imagine that even in times of war, Russian pressure for proxies here, be it extreme right or others, trying to destroy the trust between Czech Republic and the United States was just outstanding. It was an amazing game, online game, and we had to take some precautions in order to safeguard the freedom of parliament to freely debate and freely decide. And it was one of the latest examples that I have in mind, that we had to protect our democratic debate, and it was not without some surprises.
They are trying to destroy the attitude towards Ukraine among the European countries as well, but doesn't manage to do it, as from we see and hear what your government, what your parliament doing towards the help of Ukraine. And therefore, let's get back to the battlefield, because we understand how important the situation, the battlefield in Ukraine, from what we started conversation with you. So I want to add some expert thoughts about the situation, current situation with counteroffensive in Ukraine, and then we'll discuss it. So James Hippie, Britain's Minister of State of the Armed Forces, announced that Ukraine's offensive was meeting expectations and going according to plan, as reported by the Telegraph, the issue. And I want to add some more information. Hippie emphasized that the armed forces are advancing cautiously through dense Russian minefields. He also said that the Ukrainians have enough firepower to break through the enemy front. And more of this, I want to add some more quotes the Ukrainian counteroffensive is far from a failure, even though it is progressing more slowly than planned, stated the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the United States, General Mark Milley. The main problem causing Ukrainian casualties right now is minefields, not Russian aircrafts, said Mr. Milley. So from your point of view, from your expertise, Ukrainian counteroffensive, is it fast? Is it slow? And how can we speed it up, maybe together?
You know, my dream is that Ukraine is free, sovereign country with all the territory recognized internationally again under the flag of Ukraine. This is my dream that I would have to come true today. And sometimes I miss patience if I observe myself, or if I observe my friends, or if I observe the public opinion in the Czech Republic. Because we witnessed also in our own past how destructive or how cruel Russian imperialism can be. And we measure the challenge. Nevertheless, we are not on the battlefield. And if we realize that the battlefield is a line which is hardly imaginable in terms of kilometers, of hundreds of kilometers, of thousands of kilometers, we have to admit that we face also an absence of information that is very natural in terms of war, that we have to be patient enough and make our possible on our side. What we did, for instance, with our committee is that 1 month ago, we packed our affairs and we traveled by night trains to Lviv, Kiev and Dnipro, trying to understand what the needs on the ground are. It was after the blast of Kachovka Dam, and from the first hand, we could observe how the assistance already provided by the Czech Republic helped, and what is needed now. And I think that this is our role today. Emotions at the beginning of the conflict were extremely high here. Now it's maybe time for reflection, for rational approach, providing steadfast support. And by the way, the results of the opinion poll in NATO countries on the eve of NATO summit are extremely encouraging. In Prague, in Czech Republic, it is still far beyond 50%, maybe 60 or more percent in favor of helping Ukraine. And people who see Russia as an aggressor go almost to 80 or 90%. So I think that we are committed to be here, to help, and also to explain to our own public that if they do not see the images of happy emotions coming from the front, it doesn't mean that there is not an evolution which can be paying on the longer run.
We will talk about the Ukraine NATO Council a little bit later. I want to ask you, reminded that you travel across the border of Ukraine and you see and trying to understand the needs on the battlefield. But on the other hand, I know that there are lots of war correspondents that work on the battlefield line, and actually sometimes they even manage somehow to cross this border and see by their own eyes and make the articles in the European press and media. So isn't it enough to understand the real situation from the point of view of foreign war correspondents? And on the other hand, isn't enough to hear the understanding and position of our Ministry of Defense and our field generals that are on the battlefield right now, describing the needs for the fronts for this real moment? I mean, I'm talking about the aircraft F-16 that we still are trying to ask to help with air defense and air help for our counteroffensive. What's the main doubt among the politicians and among the ministries of defense of other countries not providing it right now?
Listen, I am not sitting in the room, and if I were, I would have some difficulties to disclose all the secrets. So I will give you an outsider view of mine. Not all the countries of NATO have F-16s. We do not have it in Czech Republic. We have hardly a dozen of Swedish Gripen, which are correct, but which are not owned by us. Those Gripens are to Sweden. So we have to be cautious by generalizing very quickly, because the number of countries who could provide the help by, for instance, sending the aircraft are not so high, first. Second, countries who could help with the training are much more. And here, even Czech Republic also proposed the help with the training. Three, if we take into account that, for instance, introducing F-16s in Poland or elsewhere could last, according to all the military rules, some 18 months, we maybe had to start this debate seriously very, very far back. But we have to see that the time is difficult to compress to very short. So I think that if there is already ongoing preparation for pilots, it's a very important thing. But now for the material, we have to see what are the hurdles and the problems on behalf of some countries who own these aircrafts, and this is not every single country of NATO, and how we could help, for instance, creating an international coalition of willing helping to create a momentum. And this is a role that we are ready to play. And by the way, we try to play it behind the scene.
Sure, I understand your position. I just wanted to ask you, as a representative of European Union, and especially in your field of defense department, so you understand the situation more obvious maybe from outside the country, I mean, outside Ukraine. But on the other hand, maybe you see some possible alternatives to the lack of modern and timely air support in a counteroffensive to make it more faster here on the battlefield.
You know, sometimes I'm desperate if I see the needs on the ground. On the other side, we receive so encouraging news of the skills or of the commitment of Ukrainian soldiers that this is heartbreaking. For instance, we provide training for Ukrainian soldiers here, and we had already maybe 3 or 4 rotations, and our committee had to vote and approve it. And we also visited them in the training. And just believe me, it was amazing to witness how committed they were, how professional they were, and how the Czech trainers, I mean, soldiers of Czech armed forces, were inspired by the new approach on the front line that Ukrainian generals or lieutenants and others brought to us with this training experience. I think that this is mutually extremely important, that we reinforce training and also cooperation or in the military terms. And I think that we are at the beginning because the needs are impressive and huge.
Actually, we are still ready and eager to surprise you, I mean, the Europeans and so all of the world with our military, with our soldiers, with their bravery. But anyways, let's get back to other very important decisions that were made mutually at the Ukraine-NATO Council that was held on the question of our President Zelensky in 2 weeks after the NATO summit. What is the reason for such a quick decision? That will be my first question. And could it be possible to solve all the problems during the summit in Vilnius or independently without holding the council?
You know, I used to serve as diplomat, and my task was to sit during NATO summits, NATO councils, behind the closed door. And I witnessed how Commission, at that time it was NATO-Russia Commission, Council, or how different commissions were organized. And myself, I could see from the very first hand this experience. The difference between commission, which was in the past, is that you are on the menu. But if you are a member of the council, you can ask that others come and listen to you and help you to solve your problem. And this is difference. You become one among the others. And this is a huge shift. If we take into account that before Vilnius summit, NATO-Ukraine Council didn't exist. And if I understand well, it was President Zelensky who asked to convene the council. So maybe it is a question more appropriate to be asked to his administration, to presidential administration of Ukraine, to disclose the reasons. But I can imagine that the needs of help and of assistance and also of assessment of the situation are such that he needed to discuss it behind closed door and focus only on the agenda he provided and prepared for such a event. And this is a huge difference. I can imagine.
You just said about the focus, so I want to focus on the main initiative of President Zelensky in this council, in this situation. And the main question is, are defense guarantees before we become a part of NATO. So that's why he is so initiative and our country is initiative. So my question is now, the debates in the capitals of the West mainly go around how to end this war in such a way or so for Ukraine to be secure for its future and not to be attacked by Russians or Russia in the next 3 or 5 years or so. So you understand this difficulty, and maybe behind the closed door, in the diplomatic level, you know, or you heard any realistic, effective ideas how to provide the security to Ukraine in the next 3 or 5 years?
Yes, this is a very acute question, and I think that we have to think about on 2 levels. First level is bilateral level, because according to the international law, Ukraine under attack, or any country under attack, can ask others to provide assistance. So this is bilateral level, which is, by the way, in force, because if we observe declarations or commitments of some NATO members, we see that this is something already in place. And second, this is collective defense, and this is something that we have to clarify, because for the time being it is only for NATO members. But if we come back to the months and weeks of the war, and we revisit how impressive the help of both NATO and EU countries and also globally was to Ukraine, I think that we live in a very special times, and probably this request for further assistance could be met by additional guarantees. But just don't ask me which ones, because I think that the charm of this kind of guarantees would stem only from very closed-door sessions based on trust. And this is not my role, just to speak about what comes into my mind, because it wouldn't be serious.
Do you notice that after all such huge international meetings with the Ukrainian side, and especially after the Vilnius summits, Russians became more impudent, so maybe rough because we see the exit from the grain deal, we see the attacking of agricultural port infrastructure, we see permanent rockets fire and drone attacks on the civil infrastructure. That's what we hear and feel from inside the country. So what to do with this? Can we affect somehow? I'm sorry, can you affect somehow in the situation?
I can imagine that, for instance, after elections in Turkey, we can analyze the situation there and observe that, for instance, bilateral relation between Ankara and Russia is different than 1 year ago. And I think that this is something that we have to take in mind, to bear in mind that Russia probably observes that the number of leverages it had in the past is less important than before. By the way, Putin convinced both Finland and Sweden to join NATO, and I think that this is one of the examples of his miscalculation in strategic terms. Nevertheless, we are all extremely vulnerable to attacks of Russia, be it by cyber or a network or other systems that Russia can attack. And I think that we have to be extremely aware of the vulnerability of our own systems, and at the same time rediscover, by observing Ukraine, that even under attack, Ukraine never had a serious blackout. And this is amazing. I discussed it with your Minister of Energy, and I realized that the level of creativity of Ukrainians in securing power supply and avoiding blackout is such that we again have to take some lessons and probably revisit our plans in order to be secure altogether better.
But on the other hand, we see that Russia increased the production of drones and missiles. So as we can see, the sanctions don't work in this position. And we understand that the winter is coming, the next winter is coming, and these drones, it's a very effective weapon in the hands of Russia towards our critical infrastructure, and it's obvious. So what can we do in these fields? I mean, how can we stop their communication with Iran? How can we stop the building the plants for constructing these drones on the territory of Russia? Among sanctions, are there any instruments?
I think that Russia provides us the worst example of how to behave. If we go back maybe 10 days ago, Shoigu, the Minister of Defense, was on official 3-day visit in North Korea. North Korea, which is under international sanctions, on the blacklist, to be maybe more exact, more precise. And Shoigu there speaks and deals about defense cooperation. This is completely mad in terms of international responsibility of Russia as permanent member of UN Security Council. And this is something that we have to bear in mind. Russia, in the struggle to continue this illegal aggression, is reinforcing cooperation not only with China, but with Iran, but also with North Korea. And concerning drones, this is a huge problem also for us, because 2-3 years ago, we didn't have any capacity in Czech Republic to protect ourselves against drones attack. So I think that this is a race against, this is kind of race, speeding race, that we have to create not only new arms, but also new counter-arms and defenses, because drones can fly extremely far away. By the way, some of the missiles from Russia already flew across member states of NATO, for instance, and we have to be extremely cautious. So I think that the danger is really shared, and we can together bring some solutions. By the way, not only on the governmental level, the number of civilian or of NGOs collecting money for drones for Ukraine is amazing here and in other member states of NATO or of EU. So I think that there is a huge solidarity also on behalf of regular citizens who collect money because they see that the drones are extremely important.
You mentioned the missiles, the risk, okay, let's say the risk of missiles crossing the border of the country of NATO, more of this, the provocation that might be used by the Russian government to provoke the country of NATO. So what's the red lines for you, for the country of NATO? Because I will add some more information, not to be just without data and without contract facts. According to estimates of the monitoring group Belarus Gayun, 911 Wagner vehicles convoys arrived in the country. This is more than 700 units. The last column arrived on the evening of the July 25th and consisted of at least 29 cars. So the Wagner group is one of the risk, I mean, the crossing the border and making provocations on the border. The other is the planes or drones or missiles. They can destroy, disturb the border of the NATO country. And the third risk might be such Russians used in 2018, if I'm not mistaken, the migration crisis that was managed on the border of Poland and Belarus. So what's the red lines for you when the NATO country might answer the provocation of Russia?
You know, thank you, Ksenia, for reminding the weaponization of migration experience. It was a kind of atrocity to observe that not only Belarus, but also Russia orchestrated the flow of refugees stemming both from Syria or elsewhere, and trying to operate it in a way that it comes to European countries and creates humanitarian crisis. So this is a very malevolent operation, hybrid operation, that we couldn't we could hardly imagine before. And I think that the creativity of Russian regime to create problems within societies is huge. By the way, weaponization of energy is one of them. Before, Russia always assured us that they were very solid provider of energy, and we saw what happened after. So I think that there is already some experience of how to challenge. And by the way, the energy crisis provoked and created and orchestrated by Russia was very dangerous for many governments in Europe. And at the end of the day, we succeeded to find a solution. I was amazed. And I think that, and I hope that if such a serious crisis comes or occurs, that we will creatively find new ways of avoiding to be in a trap prepared by Russia.
So from your words, at least, we understood that European countries are really aware of all the risks and threats from the Russian Federation may occur on the territory of NATO countries, and they will be ready, and they still understand the importance of helping Ukraine on the battlefield to avoid all these risks on your territory. So thank you very much for this interview. You wanted to add something?
Ksenia,
yeah.
Many thanks for inviting me. I was very happy to know and to meet your show, and I will be happy to stay in touch.
Thank you. We will. Thank you. Thank you for your help. And I will remind our audience that it was Pavel Fisher, is the chairman of the Czech Senate Committee on the Foreign Affairs, Defense and Security. So I want to welcome our next guest. It's Vadym Triuhan. It's a Ukrainian diplomat. So I'm very glad to see you on our program.
Ksenia, the pleasure is mine, really.
I want to discuss with you the situation with the safety and defense abilities of European countries because of the situation that is going on in Belarus. So I want to add some more information and we'll discuss it with you. Radio Svoboda of Belarus counted 754 pieces of equipment in the camp of Wagner's in the village of Tselets near Osipovichi in Belarus, including 62 trucks, 534 cars of various types, 33 buses, 99 trucks, and 26 trucks of armored vehicles. This amount can be seen in the photo from July 25th. The amount of equipment around the camp is growing rapidly. Journalists note that compared to the July 19th photo, the equipment increased by approximately 269 units. According to estimates of the monitoring group Belarusian Hayun, 11 Wagner vehicle convoys arrived in the country. This is more than 700 units. The last column arrived on the evening of July 25th and consisted of at least 29 cars. And I want to ask you, is this really threatens towards the European countries? And by the way, how NATO countries ready to respond to a possible real provocation towards Poland or maybe one of the Baltic countries? Because there have not been such precedents since the end of World War II.
First of all, we have to clearly understand that there is no separate player as private military company Wagner or so-called president of Belarus, Mr. Tovarish Comrade Lukashenko. No, there is one player, geopolitical player, Kremlin, Russian, so-called Russian Federation. And all those mentioned by me are just instruments in the hands of Mr. Putin and his so-called team. And when we are trying to analyze what is going on in Belarusian territory now, we have to clearly understand the aims, the goals of Mr. Putin, what he wants to achieve, actually. First of all, he wants to divide Europe. To say in broader context, to divide Euro-Atlantic community. In order to achieve this, he is trying to provocate, to establish certain bullets of tensions on the Russian-Belarusian border with Western countries. He wants to push Poland, Baltic states, Germany and other European countries to pay more attention to their safety in order to make impossible for them to provide Ukraine with high level of military support. This is first goal. Second goal, he wants to push West and to get table of negotiations because he wants to survive. And of course, in such a way, when he is trying to raise the level of tension, this is second goal. And third goal, he wants to demonstrate for his own citizens, let's say citizens, but Russians who are eating this propaganda stuff from TV channels and so on, that he is still able to take everything under control, that he is still strong leader.
But from your words, I can understand that intentions is not actions equally. I mean, he's not have intentions to attack the NATO country because we see how he is not successful even in Bakhmut during long months in Ukraine. So with what? abilities, with what army in the human equivalence, I would say, he might attack if he's not only intentions, but in actions in his head too?
Ksenia, maybe I will surprise right now by answering your very good, by the way, question. He doesn't need real actions. He doesn't need. You know why? Because people in the capital of US, Washington, people in Brussels, people in the majority of capitals in the European Union, they are afraid of transferring the Ukrainian-Russian war into third world war, into nuclear war. And by doing all this stuff on Belarus and Poland border right now, he is just rising this threat. He is just, refreshing those myths that Russia can come to our homes. Our soldiers can start fight with Russian soldiers, and this is not acceptable, for at least right now, for European and Euro-Atlantic political leaders. So, by organizing and by providing this, or by executing these special operations, he is just trying to achieve his own goals, and he is quite successful, I must say, because we see that there are more and more disturbing fast ideas that Ukraine has to negotiate with Russia, that we have to be very careful by providing Ukraine with this or those types of weapons and so on. So our diplomacy has to be very, I would say, proactive now. And to explain our European partners, first of all European, but also Americans, that this is special operation with certain goals which I mentioned. But apart of that, but instead of this, our diplomacy managed to organize a diplomatic crisis with Poland. For what? I don't understand. Do you understand it? I'm not. I think that president who has collected now for a meeting all our ambassadors in Kyiv has to very carefully discuss with our top diplomats what we have to do in order to neutralize these intentions of Mr. Putin and his team regarding the intention to divide European Union, divide the Euro-Atlantic community, and to lower level of support of Ukraine in this war.
But on the other hand, if some of the US officials call the bluff what's going on the territory of Belarus, especially in nuclear threats, nuclear weapon threats by Lukashenko and others, and Wagner's as well. But still, if European Union, NATO countries do not see threats, real threats from Russia in their direction, so why the NATO flanks being strengthened, especially along the eastern border, the border of Eastern Europe? What might be the red lines for Europeans to understand that this is not just intentions, and what they can do to predict it, except for strengthen the borders?
It seems to me that I have a clear answer for your question, direct answer. Deaths of civilians. If Russians will kill civilians, I don't know where, but in neighboring town or village of Poland, maybe somewhere in Lithuania or maybe in Romania, then everybody in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization will be forced to start action, because lives of civilians is everything. They are voting during the elections. Politicians depends on the will of ordinary people, of civilians. And if Russians will do this, then NATO will act. And I think in such a situation, there will be no any other choice for Poland, for Lithuania, for Germany, for United States in the end, except of to directly combat with Russian forces.
I want to add some more interesting ideas about how to increase defense of European Union. And these interesting ideas are such because we asked these ideas from GPT chat, the artificial intelligence. And it's interesting if we eliminate the human factor and ask just the bare facts. So here's what the GPT chat answered to our questions. So, should European countries increase defense spending? And here's one of the answers. So NATO commitments. Many European countries are members of NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which requires member states to commit a certain percentage of their GDP to defense spending. Increasing defense spending can demonstrate commitment to share security goals with the alliance. So have these costs of the defense complex changed adequately? How can you see this situation in European continent?
Well, actually, if you will analyze the level of expenditures for security and defense sector during the last several months, or maybe during last year, we can know that many countries desperately trying to rise the level of their ability to defend their territory. Germany, Great Britain, Poland, Lithuania, and many other countries announced, not just announced, but made the decision to rise the expenditures for security and defense. Poland even announced that they will get double, how to say it? No, the army will be bigger 2 times in several months. And this means that in the European capitals, politicians decided to treat the threats from Kremlin, from Moscow, seriously. They clearly understand that if Ukraine will not survive, then the next targets will appear. And these next targets will be, first of all, Poland and Baltic states, and secondly, all other countries on the Eastern and Central Europe. Who knows what will be else? Besides, Russian propagandists like Solovyov, Skabeeva, and many of they so-called experts, they are openly declare the need to bomb Berlin, London, Paris, and other European cities. So European decision makers cannot just ignore this fact. And the people, they ask the politicians, the mayors, presidents, prime minister, ministers of defense, what are you doing in order to protect us? They see what is going on in Ukraine. They can, make certain picture in their mind when they compare what was going on in Syria, now in Ukraine, 12 or 15 years ago in Georgia, and then they say for themselves, okay, what can happen with us? That's why they are working in this direction, and that's why they invest in money and resources in the sector of security and defense. This is, I think, obvious.
Interesting. If we look at from the point of view of diplomatic answer to all these rough words toward European countries that you mentioned right now about let's bomb France, let's bomb whatever country. So we see mostly they're smiling and not answering towards the propagandists' words because it's mostly for the entire audience. But still, how should it be in an adequate world where there's 1.5 year war inside of the European continent?
There are like dreams and there are reality. When we are talking about dreams, I am as Ukrainian and many of my friends, many Ukrainians, they are dreaming about the time when we will see next to us on the battlefields soldiers from Poland, from United States, from Germany, from Great Britain. This is dream. Mm-hmm. But the reality is that nobody is able and willing to send their soldiers unless there are casualties on their territories, what I have mentioned. If Russians will organize brutal provocation which will cause death of civilians, then even Germans will act. They have proved that they can change their policy. During 16 months, their policy changed dramatically. The same with people from Great Britain and decision makers from Great Britain, with our Polish friends, with Lithuanians and so on. I mentioned just today, it seems to me, or yesterday, President of Czech Republic provided permission to 14 Czech citizens to join Ukrainian armed forces. Can you imagine? President of the of NATO member state. Mm-hmm. The same can happen with other countries. But Russians, we must admit it, they are very careful. They are loudly threatened, but they do not do anything in order to act. They are trying to be very careful not to actually organize casus belli. Mm-hmm. For Poland, for Lithuania, for Germany, and for United States. If you will take this example with 3 vessels which passed through so-called sea blockade from Israel, from Turkey, and from Greece. 3 sea vessels arrived to river port. And the Russians didn't make a decision to hit them because they don't want to, to harm the relationship with Greece, which normally before the war was one of the most sympathetic countries towards Russia, with Turkey and with Israel, where Russians have very, very various, let's say, interests. So the situation is now very, very, I would say, sensitive. Every day, any day, every day and any day, the casus belli can appear. And then the war will become much more brutal and with many more countries involved. We will see what will happen during next months, but now I think for Russians it is becoming more and more difficult to take everything under control as they think.
When we see the accuracy of some politicians in the European Union, we might understand them as humans, but still when I read the answers from the GPT chat, that is accurate too as well. It's very interesting from your point of view. I will add some information and answer of GPT chat according to the arguments against increasing defense spending. Resource allocation. Critics argue that increased defense spending diverts resources away from social welfare programs, education, healthcare, and other vital public services. They believe that funding should be allocated based on the most pressing domestic needs. And in this situation, I understand that the arguments are not always effective among the politicians, but these are real arguments. The threats is here. The threats is near your borders. So even if GPT chat is arguing, so what can we answer to the politicians that are still doubtful in some questions in Europe?
In my opinion, there is just logical process, and we cannot change their minds immediately. We have to work on this gradually, step by step. If you will see how the policy of the majority of European countries changed during 16 months, this is unbelievable. Back to, for instance, January 2022, we could not even imagine that we will get really heavy weapons from Spain, from Portugal, from Greece, but it is happening. So we have to continue this very sensitive and very professional diplomatic efforts in order not to spoil, but at the same time in order to keep ongoing this trends, this dynamic. And I think that in several months we will get everything what we still are not able to get. Despite the fact that we are asking, we are trying to provide arguments and so on. I mean, military aircrafts, I mean, missiles, I mean, tanks, war tanks, and so on. Everything what we need, we will get. The only problem is time. For us, time means people's lives. Yeah. Of course, our soldiers' lives and our civilian lives. When I'm now in Borispol, for instance, and I'm more or less safe, but I understand that my child is not safe. every night Russian drone or missile can hit the house where my family lives. And the same situation for every Ukrainian on the Ukrainian territory. Doesn't matter in Zakarpattia, in my native Kharkov, in Kyiv or somewhere. And this is the most difficult task for us to explain European politicians to American politicians, Canadian politicians, and politicians from other free world states that we cannot wait anymore. The Russian Federation should be destroyed like Carthage in ancient time. Everything what we need to destroy Russian Federation.
But still, from your words, I understand that our diplomacy is quite proactive. From what I see right now, our diplomats are quite proactive and are defending our country as well. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your words. Thank you very much for your job, actually. And I want to remind that it was Vadym Triuhan, it's a Ukrainian diplomat, and for now I say goodbye to you. And I'm Ksenia Smirnova, and it was my show Talk for More Details. If you liked the episode, so press like button. If you didn't like it, just write in the comments why, and press the bell to be the first to see the most up-to-date information. And don't forget to subscribe to the Gaze platform on YouTube and on our social networks. Thank you for watching and keep in touch.